At what point did you realize she would never become your wife? Or he would never become your husband? Story 1. When he lost his job, and 2 years later, I started to put a dot on the calendar whenever he went to the casino while I was at work. The fact that I felt the need to do it was telling enough. But then when faced with it, he flat out denied how often he was going. He was going 3 to 4 times a week, and I found out later he was thousands of dollars in debt. I was out of there. Story 2. When he proposed. I knew he didn't mean it when he asked, and I knew it didn't count when I said yes. We'd been together for 6 years, and I was telling him I was unhappy with the fact that things had stagnated. It was one of many talks like that, and I was crying. He knelt down and asked me to marry him. I felt like I had to say yes, so I did. But I knew in the moment, it wasn't real. We cuddled for a few minutes before I said I didn't think he'd meant it. His response was, "Well, you kind of forced my hand." The whole thing felt so gross and so unfair. Nothing changed after that. We never talked about that moment again. I broke up with him a few months later. Story 3. When she asked me to bring her home fries after work. So I stopped into McDonald's and got her 2 large fries. I came in with them. She proceeded to take the bag from me, open it up, pull out the fries and throw them in the trash right in front of me. I was pretty shocked and asked what was wrong. I wanted frozen fries. Then asked why I even came over. This caused me to think really hard about things in the past, and there were so many other incidents like this that I just brushed off. Then I realized no matter what I did, she would resent and not be happy with me. Story 4. I was hit by a distracted driver as we were each traveling 50 plus mph. He T-boned me at an angle toward the front of my car, causing me to spin across multiple lanes of traffic and go backward into a steep ditch off a major highway. He was my emergency contact, and my iPhone immediately notified him of my potential accident as well as my location. He texted to ask if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure, but I'd been hit at high speed and to please come to the scene as I was very upset. He said he'd just gone over to his parents' house for a barbecue and that he'd check in with me later. I had a concussion for 2 weeks and was severely bruised everywhere. My dad ended up coming, and all my concussed brain could do was keep asking when my partner was going to arrive. My dad said, "Honey, he wouldn't leave a barbecue after you were in a serious car accident. I don't think he's ever coming." Found out 2 months later that he'd also been cheating on me for about 8 months as well. This was all this year. Sometimes I still can't believe it. We were together for 3.5 years. Story 5. My shy, bookish cousin started dating a really popular guy sophomore year of high school. A few months in, she heard a few guys in his circle were spreading rumors he was only with her because she did whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. Which was ironic because they hadn't done much of anything at all yet. She was really hurt. I told her he should be the one dealing with it since they were his friends. She said she didn't want to bring it up because she felt like there was a distinct possibility he had started the rumor. Even at 15, I was sensible enough to ask why she would want to be with someone she thought capable of that. Story 6. When we got in a fight, he punched a hole in the closet door, then went to the liquor store and took his anger out on the wrong person, who proceeded to hit him over the back of the head with a bottle and give him a skull fracture. He was absolutely insufferable. Refused treatment by the ambulance, refused to let me take him to the ER, refused a second ambulance treatment. He had a splitting headache for days, and finally he let me take him to the ER after like 6 days, and he found out he had a skull fracture. When he got out, he needed 24/7 observation for 2 weeks, and I had a job and a kid, so I couldn't do that. I called his mom, who came and took him, and when he came back, I had all of his stuff packed up in his van ready for him to move out. I did not play. Story 7. Lord, and lots of cheating during pregnancy, which should have been the penny drop moment, but honestly, I was knee-deep in a mental health crisis and couldn't see the forest for the trees, let alone evaluate the longevity of my relationship with the father of my child. The real moment of clarity came 10 days postpartum. I was recovering from an emergency C-section after a traumatic 36-hour labor, the most pain I've ever experienced. He was out running errands and I asked him to grab me a coffee. He told me it was out of his way and he couldn't. I was shocked. An hour later, he walked in with a gas station coffee and I remember thinking, oh, he's pulled through. It's not the best coffee, but it's the thought that counts. Well, I was wrong. It was a coffee he purchased for himself. I realized in that moment that I wasn't even really a person to this guy. He literally did not see my humanity or care for me in the slightest. He said he wanted to marry me, but he couldn't even get me a coffee under those circumstances, BC. It would require him going 5 minutes out of his way. Story 8. When my mother took her last breath in front of me, I became very distraught, to say the least. Among a lot of bad other things, like losing my friend group, family being vultures over my mother's estate, father pulling shady moves that I'm 99% sure he did to stress out my mom to make her die faster. Etc. poured it all out to my GF at the time, and she told me I was too much to deal with. I didn't have to make the choice though, because she up and cut herself out of my life. She decided to pull a full ghosting while I was busy struggling to set up all the after-death particulars like the funeral. Story 9. We were at my parents' house and got a good deal of snow overnight. In the morning, I went out to help my mom shovel. He sat on our couch on his phone for almost 2 hours while my mom and I shoveled. He had winter clothes with him. We had extra shovels. I asked if he wanted to help and he just said no. It didn't itch at his conscience in the slightest to see me and my mom out the window working while he played Angry Birds. I wasn't mad. It's not his house or his driveway. He was a guest. But I just knew in that moment, our sense of care or duty or responsibility or something along those lines did not align, and we had an expiration date. A lot of you are extremely butthurt that someone might not want to be in a relationship with someone that doesn't recognize when they should help others without being explicitly told they have to. Me thinks doth protest too much. Story 10. Long story. But it was really after he tackled me in the woods after fighting with me on my birthday, and he convinced me to come home with him, and he trapped me in his car and wouldn't take me home because he knew I was leaving. I didn't say, but we both knew. I had to threaten to jump out of a moving vehicle for him to take me home, and he made me promise to come in the house with him. I did keep that promise, and I was looking at him sitting on the bed, and that's really when it hit me it was done. We actually dated 1 more month, and it was a horrible month. He threw the engagement ring at me and punched everything during one of those last fights. Story 11. The night before I was going to propose, she called and said through tears, "I need you to know that if you ask me to marry you, I will have to say no." That was only the start of the realization. Over the next week, she divulged how years earlier she had been abducted and sexually assaulted, such that she could not have children, though she wanted kids. Understandably, there was a lot of unprocessed trauma. Whether it was because of that or other things, she admitted that for as much as she valued our friendship, she couldn't bring herself to feel the kind of attraction that warrants a wedding. She had wanted to reveal all this earlier, but could never discern the right moment or find the courage. Now, with the potential for marriage on the immediate horizon, it all became overwhelming for her. For 3 months, I held out hope that counseling would fix things, or that she'd have a sudden change of heart, like in movies. Sadly, she was just nowhere near ready. One day, while I was cooking soup and talking to her on the phone, she told me that she hoped we could stay friends forever, but that she didn't see us ever marrying. I told her that I couldn't be around her and not stay in love, so it was better to go separate ways. Even as I said it, I realized the soup had been boiling over for some time. I think that was when I accepted it was the end. I hung up the phone and wept for an hour. It was as if an immense mosaic was being shaken to the floor by an earthquake. Innumerable expectations and dreams were splintered and scattered, each fragment reflecting a future now lost. I understood immediately that rebuilding, if it ever came, would take time, but my image of life would never quite resemble the one I had imagined. 15 years later, I am glad to say I am married. My wife and I have 3 children and a great life. I'm pleased to say the former woman got help and eventually married a young widower who lost his wife to cancer. The man had 1 or 2 little kids, so she gets to be a mom like she dreamed of. In hindsight, more good has likely come from the breakup than would have from our union. This in turn has helped me to receive adversity and sorrow as potential stepping stones on life's path. Instead of being frozen by despair, experience has convinced me to wait for goodness yet unseen. Many years have passed, yet I still love the first woman. Not in the same way or with the naivete of my early 20s, but I harbor an ardent goodwill toward her, wherever she is. And I remain grateful for what we had. Some mornings when I am seated outside, birds alight on the table in front of me. After they have rested for a moment, they fly off and I never see them again. The love one shares with another does not entitle the lover to the beloved, or else love would be a cage. Love is a resting place we afford to others for as long as they need. It is a table we offer to weary wanderers before bidding sincere farewells. Story 12. We'd been seeing each other 4 or so months. I mentioned a certain musician, and she said, "Oh my God, I love him." I tried to continue on talking about a song he was on, and she stopped me with, "No, like I would marry him." I explained to her that as her BF, that's a dumb and hurtful thing to say, and she agreed, apologized, said she was just a longtime fan, whatever. I dropped it. Dude's actual famous anyways, who cares? A year later, we moved in together, not really because it was ideal, but out of necessity. A few months later, she mentioned same dude doing a concert in a nearby city like 30-minute drive, and wants to go. I'm not a fan of dude like that, and also not a fan of concerts in general, so I decline, but encourage her to go with friends that are fans instead. She kind of brushes it off and keeps talking about it, and then casually mentions something about hoping she gets called backstage to get messed so she can have his kids. I was kinda in shock, as she'd never talked like that or been that kind of spiteful person. I also was just kinda dumbfounded because it was such an odd hill for me or her to die on after almost 2 years together. I think my exact words were something like, "Yeah? Are you screwing with me or are you just that out of it?" Which got a worse response. We broke up, but had to live together another month or so. Super fun. You live and you learn, I guess? Story 13. We dated 4 years, we broke up for a year, and then got back together for a 5th year. Throughout that year, I was going out of my way to achieve a lot of my dreams and doing a lot of things that gave me more independence. One day we were talking about the things I had achieved, and I said, "I always said I was going to do this stuff." And he said, "I know, but I never thought you'd actually do it." And it was then that I realized we weren't going to stay together, and that I instinctually knew he didn't expect me to go after my dreams. And that's actually why I broke it off with him the first time. Story 14. He told me I wasn't super feminine, like you're feminine, but not like the woman in porn feminine. He also couldn't decide if wanted to be with me or not because I didn't appreciate the same music, wasn't spiritual for not having tried psychedelics. Apparently we didn't share the same interests. By interest he means curiosity for the unknown. But this man has no day job and spends his days on YouTube and Reddit, whereas I work full-time. It was pretty much a deal breaker when he said he wants to experience with other women because he's never had women be interested in him, but feels as if he is now in a better place mentally and physically to be able to achieve this, but didn't want to loose me completely, so asked for me to rekindle in YRS. I've been happily single for 2 years. Story 15. When the intimacy was gone. I don't just mean intimacy, although he started not to want that too. I mean little touches here and there, a kiss and a hug when he got home from work. We had a rule, always kiss each other goodnight, and if I didn't hug or kiss him during the day, that goodnight kiss was the only physical affection I would get. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate intimacy and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes with kids that happens. I tried being the one to initiate. I realized that this man, who at one point would do anything for me, who thought I'd hung the moon, who treated me like absolute gold at one point in time, wasn't that man for me anymore. I don't know why. Maybe he thought that because we had kids that he didn't need to maintain the relationship because she'd never leave me. We have a family. Maybe he wasn't in love with me anymore. Maybe he was cheating. I don't know why. And when I'd ask, he couldn't give me a reason. I didn't want a platonic marriage. I didn't want a roommate. I called off the engagement, and it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We do love each other, and we co-parent well now. We're friends even. But he'll never be my husband. Story 16. He would keep nagging me for intimacy until I gave in or until I started crying. I tried to have a conversation about it where I told him that it felt like he was trying to force me into having intimacy with him, and, that he had to stop. We had to talk about it multiple times. One time he said that it was difficult for him, that it was a learning experience and that he had to be allowed to mess up a couple times and I had to cut him some slack. That's when I gave up. No one should need multiple tries to learn to not pressure someone into having intimacy with them. Story 17. I had a gut feeling all along, which I overlooked because I loved him, and he had legit a lot of great qualities alongside the issues. But I think the one moment was when I told him how unhappy I was with the relationship and his behavior, and 2 days later he tried to get me to look at engagement rings. I realized that he was content with our miserable life and wanted to protect it, whereas I wanted to improve it. Also, I felt like he was trying to buy me shutting up about all the real problems we were having. When we broke up, I told one of his friends who asked that part of the issue was that I couldn't see us getting married with how unhappy we both were. Like, I couldn't imagine one more year of that, never mind the rest of our lives. Friend heard this as I broke up with him because he hadn't proposed, and then tried to get us back together by telling me X been planning to propose, and telling X that I had been frustrated waiting for a proposal. Story 18. I was widowed in my 40s. I had dated a bit, and then I met her. It was hot and heavy and moved pretty fast. It took a while to notice the little things. Avoiding true intimacy, e.g., no eye contact during intimacy, no substantive conversations, no planning for the future. We were engaged with no date set. 3 years into it, I asked why she dated Keith for 12 years, but never married or had kids. I had met him, a decent guy that married not long after they split up. She said that he wasn't the right guy. Okay, then why did you stay together so long? He was convenient, she said. Then I realized that I was just a convenience. I met my now wife a few months later, and I'm the happiest man on the planet. Story 19. When we were long distance hadn't been for the whole relationship, and I asked him to come live with me, have a registry office wedding traditional parents, and I could support him for 2 months on my salary. He was in a dead-end job. He said he didn't want to leave his hometown as all his friends were there. I asked if he thought they would stay for him. Anyway, he stayed. It took me another year or two to work it all out and end things. Fast forward a couple more years and we catch up, not too many hard feelings. I ask how his friends are. He tells me yeah, so they all moved away. I gave him the raised eyebrows. Story 20. I feel like subconsciously I realized early on, like 1 month into us casually dating, I saw something on his phone when we were next to each other that made me overthink, and when I brought it up seeking an explanation stating that it may have just been me misunderstanding or seeing things, he got really defensive and angry towards me. I stopped feeling safe with him after that point. I do tend to run at home though, so it took another 7 months and 2 breakups to seal that deal. But I'm glad I'm out now. What sealed the deal was his reaction when he failed to pull out and I became pregnant despite taking a plan B. He was very suspicious and constantly implied I got pregnant on purpose and that I was lying about getting an abortion, to the point where he asked to come and watch me take the pills for his peace of mind, despite my grief at losing my baby. I aborted because I didn't want someone like him to be the father of my child. No regrets. I'm glad I'm out. I'm now seeing a man who makes me feel so cared for and so loved and so safe. Don't settle.